The Mafia boss signed the divorce papers with a look of relief, as if he had just laid down a heavy burden. No one in that room knew. Just a few months later, he would lose his mind, tearing the world apart to find the woman who had just walked away from him. I watched him sign, each stroke of the pen slicing through my heart. He didn't look up, only said quietly, "You'll be safer when you're no longer my wife." I nodded, turned, and walked away without looking back. But that night, he cried, and I disappeared from this world. I am Cassandra Moore, the woman the Mafia boss signed away with relief, and then spent his life searching for. I stood there in that cold office, my hands gripping the strap of my beat-up leather bag, the one I'd carried since vet school. The air smelled like cigar smoke and old wood, heavy with the weight of decisions made by men who thought they owned the world. Dante's men stood around us, their eyes darting, sizing me up like I was some stray dog who'd wandered into their den. I could hear their whispers, low, sharp, like knives being sharpened. "She's nothing special," one of them muttered. Another chuckled, "Boss is better off without the baggage." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse growing up, back when I was just the girl from the trailer park, the one whose mom worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. I'd learned early how to keep my chin up, how to let cruel words slide off me like rain on a window. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. My fingers tightened around the bag's strap, the leather creaking under my grip, and I forced myself to breathe. I wasn't here to fight them. I was here to let go. One of Dante's men, a wiry guy with a gold chain glinting at his neck, stepped closer, his smirk cutting deeper than his words. "What's a vet doing in a place like this, huh? Go back to fixing cats, sweetheart." The others laughed, their voices bouncing off the walls, and I felt my face burn. I could have snapped back, could have told them about the nights I spent stitching up their kind. Men like them, bleeding out from fights they started. But I didn't. I just adjusted my bag, let my eyes meet his for a split second, and said, "Maybe I will." The room went quiet, their laughter choking off like someone had flipped a switch. They didn't expect me to answer. They didn't expect me to stand there, unflinching, like I belonged. Dante's pen paused, just for a moment, and I felt his gaze on me, heavy and unreadable, before I turned towards the door. As I walked out, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, I heard one of them laugh, a sharp, ugly sound that followed me down the hall. "She'll be back," he said. "They always come crawling back." I stopped, just for a second, my hand on the wall, the cold plaster grounding me. I wanted to turn around, to tell them they didn't know me, didn't know what I was capable of. But I kept walking, my boots echoing in the empty corridor, each step a promise to myself. I wouldn't crawl. Not for them, not for him, not for anyone. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, catching my reflection in the polished steel, pale, tired, but not broken. I pressed the button, and as the doors closed, I whispered to myself, "You're enough." It wasn't loud, wasn't meant for anyone but me, but it felt like a vow. Hey, before I go on, can I ask you something? If this story's hitting you, if you've ever felt like the world's written you off, could you open your phone right now? Just like this video, leave a comment below, and hit subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to know you're out there, listening to my story, feeling it with me. Let's keep this going together, okay? All right, let me get back to it. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. Our apartment, his apartment really, was too full of him. The leather couch where we'd sit, his arm around me, the kitchen counter where he'd tease me about my terrible coffee. I checked into a cheap motel instead, the kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bag at my feet, and stared at the ultrasound photo in my hand. I hadn't told him. I'd wanted to, but every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. How do you tell a mafia boss you're carrying his child? How do you tell a man who lives in a world of blood and betrayal that he's going to be a father? I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling the tiniest flutter, and whispered, "I'll keep you safe. I promise." I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, the hum of the motel's air conditioner filling the silence, planning my next move. I had to disappear, not just for me, but for her, for the life growing inside me. The motel clerk, an older woman with tired eyes and a smoker's cough, knocked on my door the next morning, holding a cup of coffee she'd brought from the front desk. "You look like you need this," she said, her voice rough, but kind. I took the cup, the warmth seeping into my hands, and managed a small smile. She lingered, leaning against the doorframe, her gaze softening. "Running from something, aren't you?" she asked. I froze, the coffee burning my tongue. I didn't answer, just looked down at the chipped mug, the steam curling up like a secret I couldn't share. She didn't push, just patted my shoulder and said, "Whatever it is, you're stronger than it." I watched her walk away, her words settling into me like a seed. I didn't feel strong, not then, but I held on to that moment, the first kindness I'd felt in days, like a lifeline. A month later, I was gone. I didn't leave a note, didn't make a call, I just vanished. I'd learned a thing or two from Dante's world. How to cover your tracks, how to become a ghost. I sold my car for cash, ditched my phone in a gas station trash can, and took a bus to a city I'd never been to. I dyed my hair brown, cut it short, and started going by a new name. Sarah. Plain, forgettable Sarah. I found a job at a small vet clinic, tending to cats and dogs, keeping my head down. Every day, I'd check the news, half expecting to see my face or his, or some headline about a missing woman. But there was nothing. Just silence. I'd lie awake at night wondering if he even cared. Did he notice I was gone? Did he think I was dead? Or did he just move on, like I was a chapter he'd closed? I'd touch the wedding ring I still wore, hidden on a chain under my shirt, and try not to cry. In that small clinic, there was a dog, an old mutt named Rusty, who'd been left behind by his owner. He'd sit by the door every day, waiting for someone who never came back. I'd kneel beside him, scratching his ears, and he'd lean into me, his eyes tired but trusting. One evening, as I locked up, Rusty followed me to the door, his tail wagging just a little. I looked at him, and something in me broke. I sat on the floor, right there in the dark, and let him rest his head in my lap. "You get it, don't you?" I whispered, my voice thick, waiting for someone who's gone. I didn't cry, but I felt the weight of it all. The life I'd left, the man I'd loved, the future I couldn't see. The next day, I took Rusty home with me, promising him we'd figure it out together. He was my first friend in that new life, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. One night, as I cleaned cages in the clinic, a man came in just before closing, cradling a bleeding kitten wrapped in his jacket. His hands shook, and his voice cracked as he begged me to save it. "Found her by the road," he said, his eyes desperate. I worked fast, stitching the tiny creature's wounds, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. When I finished, the kitten was breathing, weak but alive. The man grabbed my hand, tears in his eyes, and said, "You're a miracle." I pulled away, uncomfortable with the praise, and handed him a care sheet. As he left, he slipped a crumpled note into my palm. I unfolded it later, alone, and read, "You saved more than a cat tonight." I tucked the note into my pocket, my fingers brushing the wedding ring on its chain, and felt a flicker of purpose, like maybe I could still do some good in this world. 3 years passed like that, in a blur of routine and fear. I had my daughter, Elena, in a small hospital in a nowhere town. She came into the world screaming, her tiny fists clenched, her eyes, God, her eyes, already stormy gray, just like his. I held her close, whispering her name over and over, like it could protect her. I raised her alone, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to make friends. I told her stories about a brave knight, not yet a Mafia boss, because I couldn't bear to taint her with the truth. But the truth has a way of finding you. One day, I got a call from Vincent, Dante's right-hand man. I hadn't heard his voice in years, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Cassie," he said, low and urgent. "You need to move, now." I didn't ask questions. I packed a bag, grabbed Elena, and left that night. I didn't know it then, but Vincent had been watching over me, keeping my secret, even from Dante. He'd known I was alive, known about Elena, and he'd kept us hidden. But someone else had found me. In a dusty bus station, as I waited for the next ride out of town, a man in a cheap suit sat down next to me. He didn't look at me, just lit a cigarette and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. "You're a hard woman to find, Cassandra," he said, his voice low, like he was sharing a secret. I gripped Elena's hand, her small fingers warm in mine, and kept my eyes on the floor. "You've got the wrong person," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. He chuckled, flicking ash onto the bench. "Marco knows you're alive, and he's coming." I didn't move, didn't breathe, until he stood and walked away, his footsteps fading into the crowd. I pulled Elena close, her head resting against my chest, and whispered, "We're okay, baby." But I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, I boarded a bus to nowhere, the name Marco burning in my mind like a warning. I ended up in Prague, of all places. It was beautiful, all cobblestone streets and golden spires, but I didn't feel safe. I never did. I worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, walking dogs, anything that paid cash, and didn't ask questions. Elena was 5 now, smart and curious, always asking why we moved so much. I'd smile and say, "We're adventurers, baby." But her questions were getting harder to dodge. One night, she found my wedding ring, the one I still kept on that chain. She held it up, her little fingers tracing the engraving. "Until we meet again." "Who's this from, Mama?" she asked. I froze, my heart pounding. "Someone I loved a long time ago," I said finally, tucking the ring away. She didn't push, but her eyes, those gray eyes, looked at me like she knew I was hiding something. I kissed her forehead, pulling her close, and promised myself I'd keep her safe, no matter what. One evening in Prague, I was sweeping the floor of a cafe after hours when the owner, a gruff woman named Hannah, handed me a plate of leftover pastries. "You work too hard," she said, her accent thick, her eyes sharp. I shrugged, setting the broom aside, and took the plate. She watched me for a moment, then said, "You're running from something. I see it in your face." I started to protest, but she waved me off. "Don't lie to me, I ran once too." She pulled a small knife from her apron, placing it on the counter. "Take it. You might need it." I stared at the blade, its edge glinting in the dim light, and felt a chill. I didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to be the kind of person who needed it. But I slipped it into my pocket, nodding my thanks, and carried that weight with me, a reminder of the life I couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Dante was falling apart. I didn't know it then, but Vincent told me later, in bits and pieces. Dante had become a ghost of himself, sleepless, obsessed, tearing through the underworld looking for me. His men mocked him behind his back, calling him the mad Mafia lord, whispering that he'd been broken by a woman. He'd found the ultrasound photo Vincent had slipped him, and it shattered him. He'd slam his fist into his desk, roaring, "She was pregnant." He searched for me everywhere, every city, every corner of his dark world. But I was a shadow, always one step ahead. One night, Vincent said, Dante stood alone in the snow, holding my photo, whispering, "If you're alive, I'll let you hate me forever." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think he cared that much. It was easier to tell myself he'd moved on, that he'd signed those papers and meant it. During a rare moment of calm in Prague, I took Elena to a small park, watching her chase pigeons across the grass. A woman sat beside me on the bench, her hands folded over a worn book. She didn't look at me, just said quietly, "You're not from here, are you?" I stiffened, my hand tightening on the edge of the bench. She smiled faintly, her eyes kind but piercing. "I used to run too," she said, opening the book to reveal a photo tucked inside, a younger version of herself, holding a child. I stopped running when I realized I was stronger than what chased me. She slid the book toward me and stood, leaving it behind. I opened it, my fingers trembling, and saw a note scrawled inside, "Keep her close but don't let fear win." I watched Elena laugh, her hair catching the sunlight, and felt a surge of resolve, like I could face anything for her. In a quiet Prague alley, I found a street artist sketching portraits for tourists. Elena tugged at my hand, begging for one, and I gave in, handing over a few coins. The artist, an old man with ink-stained fingers, studied my face as he drew. When he finished, he handed me the sketch, but his eyes lingered. "You have a story," he said, his voice soft, like he was reading my soul. "It's in your eyes. Grief, but not defeat." I looked at the drawing, my face captured in charcoal, and saw something I hadn't noticed before: strength. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that carries you through. I folded the sketch carefully, tucking it into my bag, and thanked him. As we walked away, Elena squeezed my hand, and I felt a spark of hope, small but fierce, that maybe we could outrun this life. Then came the day everything changed. Dante was in Prague, tracking a lead on a hostage deal gone wrong. He was leading a rescue, something about a rival's territory, when he saw her, Elena. She was with a foster family, part of the group he'd freed. She looked up at him, her gray eyes locking onto his, and something in him broke. He didn't know her name, didn't know she was his, but he felt it, like a punch to the chest. Later, a DNA test confirmed it. His daughter. My daughter. When they told her who he was, she didn't cry or run to him. She just crossed her arms and said, "Mom said never to trust you, especially you." I wasn't there, but Vincent told me Dante fell to his knees, his face crumpling like a man who'd lost everything. He tried to talk to her, to explain, but she wouldn't hear it. "Mom said you destroy everything you touch," she told him, her voice small but sharp. That night he got drunk, alone, and heard my voice in a dream. "You can't save anyone, not even yourself." Elena's words cut deeper than any bullet. The underworld laughed, their whispers spreading like wildfire. Valerio's own blood despises him. He tried to reach her, bringing her toys, books, anything he thought a 5-year-old might like. But she'd push them away, her little jaw set, her eyes cold. I'd taught her to fear him, to believe he was a monster. I'd done it to protect her. But now I wondered if I'd gone too far. I was still in Prague, hiding under my new name when Vincent found me again. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Cassie," he said, "Dante knows about Elena, and Marco Santini knows about you. Marco, Dante's rival, the man who'd always wanted to destroy him." I felt my stomach drop. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Vincent shook his head. "If you love her, don't look." Before I could say anything else, a shot rang out. Vincent fell, blood pooling on the cobblestones. Marco's men stepped out of the shadows, and I ran, my heart pounding, Elena's face in my mind. I hid in a church that night, Elena asleep in my arms, the stained glass windows casting colored shadows across her face. The priest, a quiet man with deep lines etched into his face, brought me a blanket and a cup of tea. He didn't ask questions, just sat across from me, his hands folded. "You're carrying a heavy burden," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I nodded, my throat tight, and traced Elena's cheek with my finger. "She's worth it," I whispered. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and said, "The world is cruel, but love is stubborn." I didn't sleep, but I held on to his words, letting them anchor me as the hours passed, the weight of Marco's threat pressing closer. They caught me a week later. I'd been careful, but not careful enough. Marco's men dragged me to a warehouse, my wrists bound, my body aching from the struggle. They threw me into a basement, the air damp and heavy with the smell of rust. I heard boots on the concrete, and then Marco's voice, smooth and cruel, "Cassandra Moore, the woman who broke the great Dante Valerio." I looked up, my eyes burning, and saw Dante, chained, bloodied, but still defiant. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world stopped. "You deserve this," I said, my voice shaking with anger and pain. Marco laughed, his gun pressed to Dante's head. "Choose, Cassandra," he said, "him or the child." I felt my knees buckle. "Don't touch my daughter," I screamed, lunging forward, the chains biting into my skin. Dante's eyes softened, and he laughed, a broken, bloody sound. "You still call her our daughter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. In that basement, Marco's men circled us like wolves, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. One of them, a tall guy with a crooked nose, tossed a photo at my feet. Elena, playing in a park, unaware of the camera. "Pretty kid," he said, his voice dripping with menace. I lunged again, the chains yanking me back, my scream echoing off the walls. Dante's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a rage I hadn't seen in years. He didn't speak, just stared at the man, his silence more terrifying than any threat. The guy stepped back, his smirk faltering, and I realized Dante's power wasn't gone. It was just buried, waiting. I clutched the photo, my fingers leaving smudges on Elena's face, and swore I'd burn the world down before they touched her. I couldn't look away from Dante. All those years, all that pain, and here we were, trapped together in this nightmare. Marco paced, his voice dripping with mockery. The great Valerio, brought low by a woman and a child. I wanted to scream, to tell him to shut up, but my throat was tight. Dante's gaze never left mine. I deserve your hate, he said quietly, but you deserve your freedom. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. Freedom doesn't exist in your world, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. And then, because I couldn't hold it back, I told him everything. How I'd faked my death, how Vincent had helped me, how I'd done it all to protect Elena from Marco, from him, from this life. He listened, his face unreadable, and when I finished he leaned forward, his chains rattling, and kissed me. It was desperate, raw, like we were stealing a moment from death itself. Marco's gun clicked, and I pulled back, my heart racing. Before the gun clicked, a woman's voice cut through the basement, sharp and commanding. One of Marco's lieutenants, a woman with a scar across her lips, stepped forward, her boots clicking on the concrete. Enough games, Marco, she said, her eyes flicking to me. She's not worth this. She tossed a lighter onto the floor, its metal clanging, and I saw a flicker of doubt in her gaze. You're risking everything for what? A show? Marco's face twisted, but she didn't back down, her hand resting on her gun. I caught her eye, and for a split second I saw something. Regret, maybe? Or defiance? I nodded, barely, and she turned away, muttering to Marco, "Finish it, or I will." That moment, her small rebellion gave me a breath of hope, even as the chains bit deeper into my wrists. As Marco raised his gun, one of his men, a young guy barely out of his teens, hesitated, his hand trembling on his own weapon. "This ain't right," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Marco turned, his eyes narrowing, and snapped, "You questioning me?" The kid swallowed, his face pale, and glanced at me, then at Dante. "She's just a mom," he said, his voice breaking. Marco laughed, cold and sharp, and backhanded him, sending him sprawling. I saw the kid's fear, saw the way he curled into himself, and felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe, or recognition. I'd been that kid once, scared and small in a world too big. I caught his eye and nodded. Just once, a silent thank you. He looked away, ashamed. But that moment stayed with me, a crack in Marco's armor. The next moments are a blur. Marco had set up a camera, live streaming to his allies, his enemies, anyone who'd watch. "The killer of hundreds," he sneered, now kneeling for a woman. Dante didn't flinch. He just looked at me, a faint smile on his lips. "If that's my fate," he said, his voice steady, "I kneel." I screamed, begging him to fight, to live, but he just whispered, "I owe you a life." The gunshot echoed, sharp and final, blood spread across the concrete. And I collapsed, clutching him, my hands slippery with his blood. I screamed his name over and over until my voice gave out. Marco's men dragged me away, but I didn't fight. I was empty, hollow, like the world had ended. As they pulled me up the stairs, I saw the young guy from before, his face streaked with tears, and I wondered if he'd carry that moment forever, like I would. They let me go. Maybe because Marco thought I was broken. Maybe because he thought I'd suffer more alive. I stumbled into the night, the cold air biting my skin, and found my way to a bridge over the river. I stood there staring at the water below, the current dark and endless. A stranger, a woman with a scarf wrapped tight against the wind, stopped beside me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. I didn't answer, just gripped the railing, my knuckles white. She didn't leave, just stood there, her presence steady, like she knew I needed someone to keep me from falling. "You're still here," she said finally, That's enough for now. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and let her lead me away from the edge, her hand warm on my arm. I went back to Elena, holding her so tight she squirmed. I didn't tell her what happened, didn't tell her about her father. I just kept moving, kept hiding, kept living for her. Years passed, and Elena grew up, strong and fierce with her father's eyes and my stubborn heart. She was 16 when she took over Dante's empire, turning it into something new, something less bloody. I didn't want that life for her, but she was her father's daughter, determined, unbreakable. One day she came to me, holding a worn leather journal. "I found this," she said, her voice soft. "It's his." I opened it, my hands trembling, and read the final line. "If love is a curse, then I'll live in that curse forever." I closed the journal, my fingers lingering on the leather, and felt him in every word, every page. Like he was still here. Years later, in a small market square, Elena handed me a letter she'd found tucked inside one of Dante's old jackets. It was sealed, my name written in his sharp, careful handwriting. I opened it, my hands shaking, and read his words. "Cassie, if you're reading this, I failed you, but I never stopped loving you." A dried rose petal fell from the envelope, its edges brittle but still red, and I pressed it to my lips, the scent faint but unmistakable. Elena watched me, her eyes soft, and said, "He never gave up on you, Mom." I nodded, unable to speak, and folded the letter carefully, tucking it close to my heart, a piece of him I could still hold. I was an old woman by then, my hair silver, my hands rough from years of work. I'd settled in a quiet village, tending roses outside a small monastery, trying to find peace. One afternoon, Elena came to visit, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. She looked at me, her eyes searching, and said, "Mom, you need to see this." She handed me a ring, my ring, the one I'd lost years ago, engraved with, "Until we meet again." I clutched it, my heart breaking all over again. I didn't remember everything. Time had worn holes in my memory, but I remembered him, Dante, his voice, his touch, the way he'd looked at me in that basement, like I was the only thing that mattered. I whispered his name, and Elena wrapped her arms around me, her tears warm against my cheek. In that moment, I felt the weight of our story lift, just a little, like a wound finally starting to heal. You've been there, haven't you? Felt like the world didn't see you, like your pain didn't matter. But you kept going, carrying your heart through it all. You were never small, never weak. Your strength was quiet, but it was there. I see you, I know you, and I'm telling you, you're enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.